Stop. Do not buy this inscription until you watch and understand this video. I promise you this inscription works differently than you think. And on top of that, it might not even be the best inscription for your arch formation in the legendary Northern Parchment slot. I promise you, I've done a ton of testing, spent a ton of time. We're going to dive into all those results and why the results are what they are in this video, so stick around. First and foremost, how did this come to my attention? Well, naturally, we just registered for our KVK. It is Alliance Invictus. And so I went in here just like most people do. You look at the shop, you're like, oh, I cannot wait to buy all these things. I wonder what I'm going to purchase next if we win and I get an Autarch. And naturally, I don't have Destructive. And so as an Inf Garrison, I was thinking, well, maybe I should buy this in my next KVK. Well, it just so happens that we also had an Alliance mobilization, and naturally, with this mobilization, I picked up a bunch of these legendary formation chests, and what I got was something pretty special. Now, I've used some rerolls on it, hasn't gone completely the way that I wanted, but I've gotten some infantry stats, but that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about this inscription, Battle Ready, and I read this, and something seemed a little different, and so if we come in here, I wanted to see why it seemed like Battle Ready was so much stronger than Destructive, and that's when I started comparing the two. And before you turn off this video and say, Kane, you're dumb, you just don't understand that Destructive is better, you're not reading 3.5% damage, I want you to read in between the lines. This says, Destructive that is, says that the wielder troops gain 3.5 boost to normal damage. We're just going to count that as all damage because we're assuming that these are on Smite commanders. Next thing you know, it says whenever their troop launches a basic attack, it has a 10% chance to spend 100 rage and increase the damage of the attack by 70%. I just want to read that again. Increase the damage of the attack by 70%. Only the basic attack. That does not include smite damage. That does not include counterattack damage. Now, when we come over to Battle Ready, let's read this. When the wielder's troops launches a basic attack, it has a 10% chance to consume 100 rage, right? So far, pretty similar, except it doesn't have the 3.5% all damage, but it gains 35 bonus to normal damage dealt for 2 seconds. That is all normal damage. That is smite damage. That is basic attack, and that is counterattack. This is essentially a mini Ring of Doom with a slight drawback of the rage reduction. And before you question whether or not it actually works that way, I went ahead and followed up with VIP support to confirm, and you can go ahead and read that on screen right now. So now that I had this question in my head on the actual damage output of Battle Ready versus the actual damage output of Destructive, I went ahead and do what I do, and I put all this in an Excel spreadsheet, came up with the formulas, and did all the calculations. So let's break that all down. Before we get into the actual equations themselves, I do want to have a slight disclaimer here. There is a reduction of 100 rage occurring on an average of 1 in every 15 turns for both Battle Ready and Destructive. For the sake of ease and for the sake of understanding, we remove those from this equation so that it's easier for everybody to understand, even though it is slightly decreasing the total damage outputs that you will see on the screen. That total damage amount is very small, but it is about 5% of the active skill damage and about 5% of the buffs provided by the active skills. So for example, Gorgo provides a 10% increase to normal damage and counterattack damage, as well as a 20% reduction in skill damage taken for 3 seconds, and an active skill factor of 2300. So all these would be multiplied by 0.95, or in other words, a reduction in 5%. This will not be displayed in the reports that we have above, so just make a mental note that all of these reports are a little different than you see, and that the average total output displayed is slightly higher than the actual benefit that you would be receiving in game. For the total damage output of Battle Ready, we have 1 divided by 7.5, which is otherwise known as the total uptime, multiplied by the total amounts of all damage to get the 4.6 repeating percent of a total damage output increase. Now, we have this minus 5% total active skill damage plus 5% reduction to the active skill buffs and debuffs. We're going to go ahead and cross that out, remember, because I said we're taking that away from every equation that we are doing. Now, when we go ahead and go to the battle ready damage output formula when using Liu Che, we actually changed that output and the average uptime to be 1.25 divided by 7.5 times 0.35, which is the total damage increase, because of Liu Che's expertise, which makes him do about 1/4 more basic attacks when he's in combat. Okay, and now we move on to our destructive equation or formula, and this is where things get a little bit complicated. So again, the uptime is about 50% of what the battle ready equation was, so it is 1 out of every 15 seconds times 0.70, which is the damage increase of the basic attack, and this is where things, like I said, are a little bit funky. So we have percent of total output that basic attacks do of the entire battle, right? So every single battle, there are 3 ways to do damage. You have basic attacks, you have counterattack, and you have active skill damage. Basically, with how destructive works is you are only taking the calculus from the basic attacks. So once you multiply that 0.70 times the percent of the total damage output that your basic attacks have done, then you add 3.5% on top, because that is what destructive has. It's just got that baseline 3.5% damage output, and that equals your total damage increase. And now that we have the formulas, I also want to point out a general rule of thumb that you can use for most combats that occur in a 1v1 scenario. So for most combats where you have 2 commanders that deal either smite or skill damage, you can generally count on the ratio being 25% of your overall damage being your basic attacks, 25% of your overall damage being your counterattacks, and roughly 50% of your overall damage being your skill damage. Generally, the normal attacks and the counterattacks have the exact same damage, except for the fact that there are modifications on skills and in your different talent trees that change which do more damage than the other. Oddly enough, when you apply this general rule of thumb to the equation that I have just provided you for destructive, you come out with 4.666 repeating percent all damage increase, which is kind of ironic. Basically, what this means is that your basic attacks must be contributing 25% or more of your overall damage output in order to break the threshold where it becomes better than battle ready. Does that make sense? Now, if we go into the Liu Che variant, where it has a 5.8, it being battle ready has a 5.8% overall damage increase, then the threshold actually jumps up to 40%. So now, if you are using Liu Che, your basic attacks have to be doing 40% of your overall damage output in order for it to become better than battle ready. So in your experience, how often do you think your basic attack does 25% of your overall, or even in Liu's case, 40% of your overall in the open field or in the garrison? Well, fortunately for you, I went ahead and did these calculations about what happens and how much of a percent your basic attack does when you are doing one-on-ones, when you are getting swarmed, and when you're getting swarmed with only 2 targets. So we're going to dive into these results and we'll get to the bottom of which one of these is actually better. So using a battle report of a 1v1 test that I had in my previous video, I did a full calculation and a table of the first 9 turns, aka the first skill cycle of the combat. Now, I did not include the double attack from Liu because I wanted this to represent a simulation without Liu Che's expertise, and I did another simulation with Liu Che to see which one was better. So that being said, we had our average damage per turn calculation done for basic attack, done for counterattack, and done for skill damage. We also did these same averages when we were fully swarmed with 11 targets, and we did these averages when we were only swarmed by 2 targets. For the swarming of the 11 targets and the 2 targets, we did not have an increase in skill damage. That's because our skill damage was not actually hitting multiple more people. We were just multiplying the counterattack damage by 11 and 2 respectively. But that does not actually matter. In fact, that favors the destructive armament because of the fact that the less overall damage the skill damage and the counterattack damage deal, the better the destructive armament is. So even though we didn't include that in these calculations, it still serves the same purpose. Because remember, we're just seeing if the basic attacks meet or exceed the threshold needed to be better than the baseline damage increase of the battle ready inscription. Well, how'd they do? For the 1v1 with no swarms and no additional targets hit by AoE, we had the basic attack damage per turn come out to 833.44. We had the counterattack damage per turn come out to 905.44, and we had the skill slash smite damage per turn come out to 1887.22 damage per turn, cumulatively totaling 3,676.11 damage per turn. The next step is we take the average damage per turn done by the basic attack, we divide it by the total damage done per turn to get the average total damage of the basic attacks per turn, which was equal to 24.03. Now, we know already, because I've told you the threshold required for the destructive inscription to actually be better than battle ready, and it is 25%. So right off the bat, we know that in a 1v1, destructive is not better than battle ready without even plugging it into the equation. But just for the sake of demonstration, we will go ahead and see that destructive increases the total damage done by 4.621%, which is lower than the 4.6 repeating percent that battle ready gives. Now you're probably going to see a pattern here, because I'll tell you right now, it's not going to get any better. The more targets that the AoE hits, the more targets that surround your march, the less percent of your overall damage will be done by your basic attack. So if you'd like to skip ahead a few minutes to the end for my conclusions, you can go ahead and do so. But for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to go through the 2 times surrounded and the 11 times surrounded, just so I can show you guys the power of battle ready compared to destructive in a lot of these garrison situations. So now moving on to when you are 2 times surrounded, we take all the same averages per turn, but we multiply the counterattack damage by 2, obviously because you are now getting hit by 2 targets and dealing that damage to 2 targets. So that makes our average damage per turn jump up to 4,581.5488 damage per turn, making the total percent of damage that our basic attacks did actually lower, obviously because our counterattack is taking more percent, lower to 19.28% of our total damage done. When we plug that in to our equation, we then understand that destructive only gains 4.4% total damage increase, which is even less than the last one. And for this next one, it'll be even lower. So let's go on to 11 times surrounded. Now moving into the situations when you are 11x surrounded, again, this is only increasing your counterattack. This is not even counting for skill damage. So, take that into consideration if you're using Liu as your garrison, and it's doing a little bit of skill damage in an AoE. But either way, we're not including it for the sake of this video. But this brings our total output to 12,730.5 damage per turn. Only 6.94% of that is being done by your basic attacks. When you plug this into the equation that I gave you, it comes out with 3.96% damage increase done by destructive, which obviously, again, is even less than you are doing with the battle ready inscription. All right, so I have now gone over 3 separate scenarios in which battle ready is better than destructive, and I will tell you that in the open field it'll be in the same situation. So Liu Che inflicts a ton of smite damage to 5 different targets. That means that as the skill damage percentage goes up, the basic attack percentage goes down, and so you will still get a very similar result. So in almost every single situation that I can think of, when both commanders are doing at least some form of skill damage and some form of counterattack damage, then the destructive inscription will not be better. Let me repeat that. Will not be better than the rare version in battle ready. So in what situations might possibly destructive be better? Well, I'll give you some situations. So there are a lot of commanders out there that don't actually do any skill damage. All right. So for example, if you are doing a 1v1 and you are in a garrison against a rally and you're using something like Gorgo with Attila in a Warriors and Bound KVK, then I can promise you, I can't promise you, I can guess with confidence that destructive will actually be better than battle ready because Attila is doing absolutely no skill damage at all, which means that it'll just be like Gorgo's active skill doing maybe 20% or less of the overall damage of the garrison, and then it'll be the normal attack damage doing something like, I don't know, 40% or more of the actual damage inflicting on the rally, in which case it has surpassed that 25% threshold of the battle ready and will then thus be outperforming battle ready. But that being said, as soon as that Gorgo Attila starts to get swarmed, then that counterattack damage goes way up and the basic attack damage goes way down in regards to percent of your overall damage. And in that case, then battle ready would be better yet again. The exact same logic could be brought to the table when you're talking about Gorgo with Constantine, right? Constantine brings no skill damage to the table. So when you're doing a 1v1, let me make that very clear, a 1v1 with a rally, then something like destructive will definitely outclass battle ready. But at the same time, as soon as that gets swarmed, same situation, battle ready's value spikes through the roof. So one of the things that I gave you guys today was the equation to go and do this testing yourself. If you don't know if the Gorgo Attila is actually going to be better in the garrison, even when it's being swarmed with the battle ready versus the destructive armament, well, you can go test it in KVK, right? You can do the math, you can figure it out. It's going to take a lot of work, but it's something that you are now able to do. I can pretty much say with confidence that whenever anything is getting swarmed, it is probably just better to use battle ready by default. However, if there are situations where you are getting one-on-one rallied, let's say for example, pass fights or pass rallies, right? I think if you have a pass rally, I think that if it cannot get swarmed, then the battle ready will lose a lot of value, and thus your Gorgo Attila would absolutely slap with something like a destructive attached to it. But seriously, guys, don't be afraid to go out there and test this yourself. I'd love to hear your feedback. I know for a fact that I will not ever be buying a destructive inscription and putting it on my arch set now, because not only do I have battle ready, but I also have bellicose, which just increases more damage. So this pretty much seals the deal for me. I will never ever buy destructive and put it on this armament. That being said, I'm not saying destructive is bad, I'm just not saying it is very good compared to the arguably, I don't even really think it's arguably, it is better in 90% of the situations where you're really looking for its value. You're thinking battle ready is the better inscription. That being said, we're arguing between like a 4.5 to 4.6% overall damage increase from, battle ready and from destructive. But you go ahead and you look at these other things on the arch formation. I mean, this is like 2 destructives right here. Right? Like when you're getting swarmed, this is twice as good as a destructive, right? We did the math earlier in the video. You only get like 3.9% overall normal damage boost with a destructive. Like when you're getting 11x swarmed, this is just twice as good. I don't know, it's kind of crazy. It feels like the power level of destructive is just kind of a little too low, and I think that in order to make it so that this rare inscription isn't better, they need to drastically increase the power level of destructive as a whole. So as a final decision on this topic, I would say that battle ready is the better inscription than destructive. It is not super black and white, right? There are some times when destructive will be better, like Gorgo Constantine, like Gorgo Attila, when it's not being swarmed. But at the same time, you always have to play defensive. This is why people use Gorgo Attila. It's why people use Charles, because swarming is so meta in today's Rise of Kingdoms KVKs. You just have to prepare for the worst. So I see that as pretty much just the green light to just say that battle ready is the better inscription. But all that being said, hell, if you don't have battle ready, then I'm pretty sure destructive is going to be just fine. So don't hesitate to buy it too much. I think that this is just a precautionary tale to tell you that, hey, if somewhere down the line you get battle ready, like it's kind of better. Like I mean, would you actually get rid of your destructive to put on a battle ready? I mean, I think at the very high end, right? If you're looking for that 0.5% overall damage increase during swarms, like 1093, 1960, I mean, you might. So anyway, try not to lose an Autark if you haven't already. Again, go ahead and buy Destructive now if you are a Garrison lead or whatever and you need it. It's still a good armament compared to a lot of other things out there. I'm just saying it might not be the best, and you might have better options to spend your Autark rewards, like on a Hunter or like on 25% gold gathering speed. No, I'm completely kidding. Please don't do that. Anyway, guys, that wraps up this video. I put a lot of effort into this one, so if you could please give a like and subscribe, I would appreciate it a lot. Please leave your comments down below in the comment section. I would be happy to review them. And any feedback that you have with the calculations, I'm also here for it. I'm open to criticism. I do understand that not including the damage reductions from the 100 rage might skew these calculations a little bit. I try to avoid that as much as possible, but just take into account that on average, like, I did say that 4.6 repeating percent damage increase was going to come from the battle ready armament or inscription. Instead, it's more like 4.5 just because of that rage reduction. But it's so small that it doesn't affect the message that I'm trying to get across, which is that battle ready is better, if not significantly better, than destructive is in a lot of situations where you're either getting swarmed or you're hitting a lot of things with the Liu Che AoE. So anyway, I hope you guys take care, and I will see you guys again in the next one. Peace.